Nanga Parbat, 8,126 meters, the ninth highest 8,000er on the planet, the western edge of the Himalayas, Pakistani Kashmir. On a map, it is a single dot, but on the ground, the mountain looks completely different. It stands apart, away from the main ridge, and is visible for hundreds of kilometers in every direction. Above the green valley of the Indus rises a wall of stone and ice, and from the base to the summit, there are roughly 7 kilometers of vertical drop. 7. One of the largest wall systems on Earth. To the south, the summit is faced by the Rupal Face, about 4,600 meters of sheer vertical, the highest mountain face in the world. To the west, the mountain is closed off by the Diamir face. To the north, by the Rakhiot side. Each has its own avalanche chutes, its own ridges, its own camps. The routes here are not just long. They pass through zones where rescue is technically impossible. The climate is brutal. In summer, the monsoon reaches the mountain from the south. Clouds, snowfall, avalanches. Storms come without warning and last for days. In winter, it gets worse. The wind on the ridge knocks a person off their feet, the temperature drops below -40, and the window of good weather is 2, at most 3 days a month. The rest of the time, nobody works on this mountain. Nanga Parbat earned its nickname before the first human ever stood on its summit, the Killer Mountain. By 1953, when the climb finally succeeded, the mountain had already taken 31 lives. The first man to reach the top was the Austrian Hermann Buhl. He did it alone, without oxygen, and the final push from the assault tent to the summit took him 17 hours. He came back almost blind, with frostbitten feet, but alive. More than 70 years have passed since that day, and every decade new names are added to the list of the dead. The death rate across the entire history of climbing here is around 21%, one of the highest among all the 8,000ers on the planet. By the mid-2020s, the mountain had taken more than 90 lives in total. Behind every number stands a specific decision, an error, an avalanche, a storm, frostbite, or a snapped rope. For 7 winters in a row, one man kept coming back to this mountain, a Pole with no loud titles and no big sponsors. Tomasz Makiewicz, known to everyone simply as Tomek, was born in 1975 in a small Polish town. He came to the mountains not through a sports club and not through the official Polish Himalayan organization, on his own. That is an important detail because in Poland, mountaineering is almost a national sport with a long school and a tough hierarchy, and an outsider has a hard time breaking in. Tomek's youth was not easy. Difficult periods which he later spoke about calmly without dressing them up. He pulled himself out by himself. The mountains turned out to be part of that way out, a way to exist so that every day you answered for yourself and so that nobody took the next step for you. Money was always tight. He put his expeditions together 1 coin at a time. Crowdfunding, friends, his own savings, small private donations. Every trip to Pakistan turned into a separate battle with the budget, and every expedition was arranged the way he liked it. 2 or 3 people, minimum gear, no long caravans, no high-altitude porters, no oxygen cylinder on the back. In the mountaineering world, he was considered an oddball for a long time. He had no titles, no records, no backing from the big federations, but he had a stubbornness that even the masters envied. On the big mountains he worked in alpine style, fast, light, without long ropes and prefixed camps. It is the most dangerous way to climb an 8,000er. You carry everything on your back, and if the weather breaks, you have no supplies, no shelter above, no support team. Of all the 8,000ers on the planet, Tomek chose one, Nanga Parbat, and specifically in winter. At that point, winter Nanga Parbat remained unclimbed. Not a single expedition had managed to reach the summit in the winter season. He set himself the goal of doing it and turned it into the project of his life. He made his first winter attempt in the 2008-2009 season, and from then on, almost every year, he left for that mountain again. 6 winter seasons in a row, then a 7th. Every time, a retreat. Once he was stopped by the wind on the ridge, another time by an avalanche, the 3rd time by his partner's illness, the 4th by frostbite. Once he turned back literally a few hours of climbing below the summit, because he understood. There would not be enough strength left for the descent. In Poland, he was first considered an enthusiast, then a stubborn man, then almost a hero. Journalists called him the man of Nanga Parbat. It was both a compliment and a diagnosis. Between seasons, he lived an ordinary life. He worked, raised money, recovered from altitude injuries, and by November, he was back on the expedition schedule. Those who saw him at home said that between trips, he seemed to put his life on pause. From 2015 onward, a steady partner appears next to him, the French climber Elisabeth Revel, technical, tough, capable of moving at his pace and making decisions on equal terms with him. Together, they push above 8,000 meters, but they do not reach the summit. The mountain shuts down every time before they can get to the top. They get turned back by weather, then again by weather, then by exhaustion, then again by weather. Back home in Poland, Tomek has a family, a wife, children. Every winter they see him off to the mountain, not knowing whether he will come back. He himself said in interviews, "This mountain has become a part of me. I cannot let it go until I reach the top." By the winter of 2018, this is already his 7th winter expedition to Nanga Parbat. In terms of attempts, it is a record for one man on one mountain in the winter season. In December of 2017, Tomek and Elisabeth arrive once again at base camp under the Diamir face. Just the two of them, on their own feet, on their own shoulders. The way they were used to. They work to a familiar plan. They set up intermediate camps, drop down to acclimatize, then climb higher again. The mountain lets them through slowly. First wind on the ridge, then avalanche danger, then a window too short to use. December, then January, days are spent, strength is spent. Around the 20th of January, a short weather window forms. The decision is to go for the summit. The route is the classic one, the Kinshofer line, up the Diamir face. On the 24th of January, they spend the night above 7,000 meters. On the morning of the 25th, they set out on the final stretch. The wind on the ridge wears both of them down. Visibility is limited. The temperature is well below -30. Every 100 meters of vertical takes more out of them than the last. Late in the evening of the 25th of January, 2018, Tomek Makiewicz and Elisabeth Revel stand on the summit of Nanga Parbat. Revel becomes the first woman to have climbed this mountain in winter. For Makiewicz, it is the end of 10 years of work. They spend only minutes on the summit. Already in the first steps of the descent, it becomes clear. Something is very wrong with Tomek. He has snow blindness, his eyes can barely see, severe frostbite on his face and hands, signs of altitude sickness in its heavy form. The triumph lasts less than an hour. From that point on, it is a fight to get a man off an 8,000er alive. Tomek can no longer descend properly. He stays on his feet, he walks, but he sees poorly and weakens fast. Every step becomes a task. Where to place the foot, how to keep balance, how to make out the line down. At around 7,400 meters, they wedge themselves into a crevasse with Revel. Not a camp, not a tent, just a crack in the ice where you can stretch out and survive the night. Outside, the wind is howling, the temperature is dropping. Inside, it is relatively quiet. The two of them climb in, squeeze together, try to warm up. In the morning, Revel literally pulls Tomek out of the crevasse and helps him get down a little lower, to about 7,200. Beyond that, he cannot move. His strength is gone. His eyes are seeing worse and worse. Revel leaves him a sleeping bag and a gas stove for melting snow. She sets him up in a shelter between rocks, as best as that is possible at such an altitude and in such wind. Distress messages go out from her satellite device, to her husband in France, to the Polish support team. Coordinates, condition, a request for help, and the decision she makes there, at 7,200, to stay with Tomek means to die together. To go down for help alone is the only chance. She heads down. She already has frostbite on her hands and feet. She has no tent, and it is getting dark. She moves along the familiar route toward the 3rd and 2nd camps, and holds on to one thought. Help will come. From here on, the story has two protagonists in different points on the mountain. One is going down for help. The other is staying at 7,200 in a jacket and a sleeping bag in the dark. The chances of surviving at such an altitude in a storm are almost none. 200 kilometers from Nanga Parbat on K2, at this very moment sits a large Polish winter expedition led by Krzysztof Wielicki. They are preparing their own summit push, the first winter ascent of K2, a goal no less ambitious than Tomek's. The distress signal from Revel reaches them at base camp. The decision is made within hours. Their own expedition is put on hold. 4 men are sent for the rescue: Adam Bilecki, Denis Urubko, Jarosław Botor, and Piotr Tomala. 2 go up the mountain, 2 handle camp and medical support. On the 27th of January, around 1340 local time, 2 Pakistani Army helicopters drop the 4 of them onto Nanga Parbat itself, at about 4,900 meters. This is already on the mountain, but still far from the point where Tomek was left. Bilecki and Urubko head up immediately without rest. They have just been on acclimatization climbs on K2. Their bodies are already at the limit. There is no time to wait. The temperature on the route drops toward -60. The wind picks up. With wind chill, it feels like around -70. In such conditions, work is almost impossible. They work. In 8 hours, the 2 of them climb nearly 1,200 meters of vertical. Sections like that usually take a day, sometimes 2, with rest and overnight stops. These 2 go without sleep, without proper food, on adrenaline and on the training of the last few years. Around 2 in the morning of the 28th of January, they make radio contact with Revel. She is approaching the second camp at about 6,100 meters. They find her alive, severe frostbite, exhaustion, legs that barely respond, but she is conscious, she speaks, she answers their questions. She can no longer descend the ropes on her own. Bilecki and Urubko begin the evacuation, and at the same time, the question that has been hanging in the air for hours has to be answered. Is it possible to go higher, to where Tomek was left? This decision is the hardest thing they have ever done. The rescuers have no way of climbing above 6,500 meters from Rakhiot. At 7,200, the storm is raging, wind over 80 kilometers per hour, 0 visibility. With wind chill, it feels like around -70. To push further means new casualties, and no chance of reaching Tomek, who by this point has already spent a full day up there in the storm. Bilecki and Urubko make one of the hardest decisions of their careers, to stop and evacuate Revel. That decision will be debated publicly for a long time afterwards, and they themselves will say they lived with it heavily. But there was no other option. In the mountains, there is a moment after which continuing a rescue means losing the entire group. Revel is brought lower. On the morning of the 28th of January, she is evacuated by helicopter. She is taken to a hospital in Islamabad, then to Chamonix in France. Some of her fingers the doctors will not be able to save. The recovery will take months. Tomek Makiewicz does not come back from the mountain. By the official assessment, he died within a day after Revel left him in the crevasse. The body was never found. The search operation was declared impossible because of the weather, the altitude, and the risk to new people. In March of 2018, Tomek's father, Vitold, receives in Pakistan a death certificate for his son. The official date is the 30th of January 2018. This story traveled around the world's press. The first woman on Nanga Parbat in winter, a nighttime rescue in -60, and a Pole who had stood at this mountain for 7 winters and finally took it, on top. Winter Nanga Parbat was climbed again in February of that same 2018. A different team, a different route, but the first to reach this summit in winter was Tomek Makiewicz, and from this mountain he did not come back. An entire country spends 10 days glued to the radio. Not an election, not a war. One man at 7,000 meters in Pakistan, on the south face of Nanga Parbat. His name is Jose Antonio Delgado, and back home in Venezuela, they call him El Indio, the Indian. On the 11th of July, 2006, he reaches the summit, and then, day after day, he keeps coming on the radio from a tent that the wind is slowly tearing apart. Millions hear him. Nobody can reach him. In Venezuela, in July of 2006, every morning starts the same way. Radio, newspapers, straight-to-one update. About a man in mountains most of those people have never seen. Jose Antonio Delgado, 41 years old. At home, they call him El Indio, the Indian, a nickname from his youth, for his dark skin and a stamina he himself thought of as ordinary. The first Venezuelan to climb 5 8,000-meter peaks. Now he is on Pakistan's Nanga Parbat, and for more than a week he has not been able to come down. There is no rope partner beside him, no one to throw him a line or push a dry sleeping bag his way. There is a radio and a base camp far below, where his friend Edgar Guaraguada keeps the channel open around the clock. Venezuelan papers put Delgado's name on the front page. Radio stations cut into their broadcasts for short bulletins from base camp. The presidential office comments on the operation out loud. In the churches of Caracas, people gather. Most of these people have never held an ice axe. But the main thing they understand without any gear, their man is in trouble, and his strength is leaving him, slowly, in front of everyone. Why a whole country is following one climber makes sense if you wind the clock back 40 years. May of 1965, Caracas, a boy named José Antonio Delgado Sucre. Venezuela is a country with no Himalayas. There are the Andes in the west, the flat tepuis of the Grand Sabana. People come into climbing through sports clubs, not family lines. Young Jose pulls ahead of the other kids fast, short, lean, with a heavy gaze. On his very first trips into the Venezuelan Andes, the club boys start calling him what the whole country will call him one day. Not as a joke, more with respect. He keeps going where the others are already stopping. In the 90s, he stacks up South American experience. Aconcagua in 34 hours. Peru's Huascaran in 14. In Venezuelan record books, those numbers still stand as national records. In 2001, Delgado leads the first Venezuelan expedition to Everest. On the 23rd of May, he and his rope team stand on the summit. The country gets its first man on Everest. A national sports medal, magazine covers, television interviews, all of it inside a couple of months. By 2006, his list reads Shishapangma, Gasherbrum 2, and 3 more Himalayan summits above 8,000. The 6th one is next. Delgado picks Nanga Parbat. He does not take the most traveled route from the west. He takes the south, from the Pakistani Rupal Valley. The Rupal Face is considered one of the highest mountain walls in the world, more than 4 kilometers of vertical drop. The upper half is almost sheer, the lower half is avalanche country, and the weather windows are shorter than on the other sides. For the biography of El Indio, an easy line is no longer an option. Edgar Guaraguada signs on as his partner. With Delgado, they have been on Aconcagua and on Gasherbrum together. On the radio, they read each other instantly. A film crew from the Venezuelan company Explore Art Films travels with the team. They are shooting a pilot for a television series about climbing. That this footage will turn into a feature-length film about the last expedition, no one in June is yet imagining. In June of 2006, the team arrives in Pakistan and sets up base camp. The acclimatization rotations begin, and the plan breaks. On the approach, Guaraguada goes down. A stomach infection, an altitude problem, the sources name the cause differently. He cannot go any higher. They make a calm decision. Guaraguada stays at base. Delgado goes up alone. Alone is not a classic solo. Delgado checks in by radio at every scheduled time. And at base, Guaraguada has a powerful telescope. Acclimatization takes several weeks. By early July, the upper camps are stocked. The route is fixed with rope. All that is left is the weather. The window opens on the morning of the 11th of July. A short break with no strong wind, with a major storm forecast right behind it. In the pre-dawn dark, he heads up. A long, draining day on snow slopes. By noon, Delgado stands on the highest point of Nanga Parbat, the 6th 8,000-meter peak of his life and the hardest one. A short radio call to Guaraguada. Summit reached, starting the descent. At base, several cameras and tape machines record those words at the same instant. 2 years later, that tape will go into the film. Delgado's voice in that minute is the last good news of the expedition. The forecast is already starting to fall apart, but he does not know it yet. A multi-day cyclone is moving over the valley, and it will catch him before he reaches Camp 4. Visibility drops almost instantly. Wind, snow, the temperature falling fast. By the morning of the 12th of July, Delgado crawls into Camp 4, a small tent on a snow shelf above 7,000 meters. He has almost no strength left to find it on his own. The trail is buried, the landmarks are gone, visibility is down to a couple of meters. In those conditions, a person will calmly walk right past his own tent, 3 steps away, and never notice it. Guaraguada is at the telescope. In the lens, he can see a tiny red dot of a down suit crawling along the slope. That is his friend. He takes the radio and he literally walks Delgado in, step by step. Meter by meter, left a bit, stop. Now into the couloir, 30 meters. Do you see the black rock on the right? The tent is 10 steps behind it. The recording of that conversation is one of the heaviest pieces of audio Venezuelan climbing has ever left behind. He makes it to the tent and gets on the radio. A muffled voice, broken sentences. He wants to drink, to warm up, to sleep. In the morning, the moment the weather gives him even an hour of clearing, he will start down to Camp 3, where there is a stash of food. That is the last relatively calm check-in. During the night, the storm hits the mountain again with new force. In the morning, Delgado does not come on the radio at his scheduled time. He does not come on an hour later, or 2 hours later. The 13th of July passes without a single word. The 14th, the same. A solid wall of cloud sits over the upper slopes. The telescope is useless. At base, they man the radio around the clock. Someone is always on the channel in case Delgado manages to send even a short signal. The radio log has the same line over and over. Channel clear, no signal. The silence is passed on to Caracas, and the country starts to understand that it is bad. Television networks cut into normal news with breaking updates. Newspapers print maps of the Rupal Valley for readers who, a week earlier, had never heard of this mountain. Side panels explain what a high camp is, why a helicopter at that altitude simply cannot fly. Delgado's wife, Frida, goes on the air. Briefly, calmly, she asks the country to support him and not to spread rumors. The Venezuelan Ministry of Sport officially requests assistance from the Pakistani authorities. No one in the world has a technical option to lift Delgado off that mountain. The hope is that he will get himself down to Camp 3. On the 15th of July, a Saturday, the base camp radio suddenly comes alive. Guaraguada has just enough time to hit the record button. Delgado's voice is exhausted, slow, with long pauses between the words. There is no panic in it, no breakdown, but every word costs him a separate effort. He says the storm has flattened the tent. He is buried in snow. His legs barely respond. Several days now without proper food or water. He has to melt snow with a stove whose gas is almost gone. For the first time in the whole expedition, he asks for help in plain words. He is no longer sure he can come down on his own. Guaraguada locks in the coordinates of Camp 4 and passes them on right away to the Pakistani authorities and to the local climbing offices. In Caracas, they play that radio session on the air, word for word, from the recording. The voice the country was used to hearing in sports broadcasts now comes through from deep inside a mountain. Posters appear on the streets. Jose, hold on. Venezuela is with you. At the sports centers where Delgado used to speak to school children, people start bringing candles. On the Pakistani side, the first rescue attempt is launched. 6 high-altitude climbers from Shimshal head for base camp. Shimshal is a small village in the north of the country, where several generations of strong porters and guides have come from. 6 Pakistanis who have agreed to walk into a storm for a stranger. The 6 of them head on to the route under wet snow, the same southern side Delgado used on the way up. At the intermediate camps, the storm turns them around day after day. They push higher, gain 100 meters, maybe 2, and turn back every time. 1 day per attempt, 1 day that works against the man above. Guaraguada counts the hours. At that altitude, without water and without warmth, the body does not last long. For Delgado, the count has already passed many days. The movements get slower, the reactions get shorter. On the 17th of July, a Monday, through the static on the channel, Delgado's voice comes through one more time. The last time the country will hear him alive. The voice is barely audible. Between the words, gaps of 20 seconds. In those gaps, you can hear the heavy breathing. Delgado says the tent is ripped. The wind is carrying pieces of fabric away. He cannot stay in the upper camp. He will try to get down to Camp 3 on his own. He is the one making the decision. No one at base is talking him into leaving. Everyone on the channel understands. Without shelter at that altitude, he will not last long. Before he heads out, he says a few words to his wife. He asks Frida to take care of herself. He sends his love to his parents. On the mountain, he does not cry. On the mountain, there is no strength left for that. The radio cuts out in the middle of a sentence. Guaraguada keeps the channel open for another hour. Silence. Static. Silence again. That recording will later be heard by all of Venezuela. On several Caracas radio stations that evening, the music goes off the air for hours. No one at base says the obvious out loud. A man at 7,000 meters without shelter in a storm after that many days up high has almost no chance of reaching Camp 3. From the 18th to the 21st of July, a wall of bad weather sits over the upper part of the mountain. Every day the Shimshali team tries to climb higher, and every day they fall back. 200 meters maybe, 300 at the edge. On the 22nd of July, the sky clears a little. The window is short, a few hours. Using the old fixed ropes from the previous rotations, the rescuers pass Camp 3 and keep climbing higher. At around 7,100 meters between Camps 3 and 4, they find him. Nearby, the shreds of the torn tent. All of his gear is on him, crampons on his feet. From the scene, it is clear. He had tried to leave, but he did not make it down to Camp 3. One of the 6 gets on the radio with base. He gives the altitude, describes the position of the body. Guariguata takes the report and, over a secure channel, passes it on to Caracas, to the family. Bringing the body down from that altitude is not possible. On that wall, with that drop, in those conditions, it would be the next tragedy. Over the radio, the Delgado family asks that he be left on the mountain where he was found. The 6 men say goodbye, cover the body with snow, mark the point, and start the long descent. The news reaches Caracas the same day. Venezuela declares mourning. The newspapers come out with a black frame around the front page, in the very spot where, until then, the updates from the mountain had been printed. Frida Delgado goes on television. Briefly, no tears on camera. She thanks the 6 Pakistanis who climbed into the storm and found her husband. She thanks the country for being there for 10 days. 2 years later, Explorart Films releases a documentary film, Más allá de la cumbre, Beyond the Summit. The edit includes the actual recordings of the final radio sessions. Viewers hear Guariguata walking his friend in over the radio. They hear Delgado's voice from the upper camp, first calm, then exhausted, then saying goodbye. The film becomes the central documentary project of those years in Venezuela and travels across Latin America. For Venezuelan climbing, the Delgado story becomes a reference point. Schools take his name. At the entrances of mountaineering clubs, his photographs hang on the wall. In Caracas, they put up a monument to him. Young climbers walking into sports clubs today still know who El Indio was, even if they were born after 2006. In 1895, a Briton went up the western rib of Nanga Parbat and never came back. He became the first person in the mountain's history to die on it. 124 years later, in February 2019, a 2-man team disappeared on that same rib. They wanted to climb it in winter for the first time ever. One was an Italian, Daniele Nardi, on his 6th attempt in a row. The other was a 30-year-old Briton, whose mother had been swept off the ridge of K2 by the wind when he was 7. Their last radio signal came in from 6,300 meters. 2 weeks later, 2 dark dots were spotted through a telescope on a shelf of snow. Tom Ballard was often called that woman's son. He was born in 1988 into a family that breathed mountaineering. His mother, the British climber Alison Hargreaves, became the first woman to summit Everest solo and without oxygen in May 1995. 3 months later, on the 13th of August that same year, she was swept off the ridge by hurricane-force winds while descending from K2. Her body was never found. Lower down, all they recovered were fragments of her gear. Tom was 7 that August. His sister Kate was 4. Their father, Jim Ballard, took the children out of Britain and moved them to the Alps. The family settled into a van at the foot of the mountains and lived that way for years. Minimal belongings, constantly on the move between Chamonix and the Dolomites. There was no school, but there were always walls right next door, and Tom climbed almost every day from early childhood. Throughout all of it, someone else's shadow trailed behind him. In any conversation about him, the same phrase always came up: Alison Hargreaves' son. Journalists asked whether he remembered his mother. Older climbers studied him, made comparisons. Tom answered rarely and briefly. In one of his few interviews, a line slipped out that was widely quoted afterwards: "I want to do what she did." He didn't explain what exactly. He didn't say up to what point. By the age of 26, Tom stood at the choice every strong solo climber eventually faces. You can keep climbing good routes for your own pleasure, or you can try something nobody has done before. In the winter of 2014 to 15, he chose the second. He gave the project a short name, Starlight and Storm, after an old book about big wall mountaineering. The idea was simple. In a single winter season, solo, climb the 6 classic north faces of the main alpine peaks. Cima Grande di Lavaredo in the Dolomites, the north face of the Eiger, and 4 more between them. Each one, on its own, is a serious summer project for a team. In winter, alone, it's on the edge of what's reasonable. Doing them all back-to-back in one season had never been done before Tom. He finished the last route by the end of December 2014. No advertising campaign, no film crew on his shoulder. The climbing press didn't notice him right away, but by the middle of 2015, Ballard's name in the community was already being spoken separately from his mother's. His life, on the outside, didn't change. The same van, no big sponsorship deals, a few small expeditions to the Karakoram, peaks below 7,000. That was it. By the age of 29, he hadn't done a single 8,000er. The community argued about that. Some thought Tom was deliberately staying away from commercial high-altitude mountaineering, with its cues on the fixed ropes. Others thought that sooner or later he would come round to it, and if he did, it would be straight onto something hard. 1,500 kilometers from the Alpine walls lived a man with his own answer to the same question. Daniele Nardi, an Italian, was born in 1976 in Sesa, a small town in the Lazio region, an hour's drive from Rome. By the end of the 2000s, he was already an established climber with 8,000ers to his name and experience on difficult Himalayan faces. Sponsors, lectures, contracts. But all of that was just the framing. In truth, Nardi had only one route, Mummery Rib, a long rock and snow line on the Diamir face. That's the western side of the mountain. The rib is named after the British climber Albert Mummery, one of the pioneers of 19th century mountaineering. In the summer of 1895, Mummery tried to become the first person in the world to climb the mountain from precisely this line, and he vanished somewhere above 6,000 meters along with 2 Gurkha companions. No bodies were found. From then and right through to the end of the 20th century, his rib remained unclimbed, in any season. Nardi decided he would climb it in winter. He tried for the first time in the 2012 to 13 season, then for 4 more winters in a row, with different partners, using slightly different tactics. 5 times, retreat, wind higher than forecast. An avalanche above the high point already reached, a partner's frostbite. A weather window that slammed shut in 12 hours instead of the promised 3 days. Each time, he came back to Sesa, explained things to his sponsors, rested, and started preparing the next attempt. By 2018, Nardi was saying it publicly. Either he was going to climb that rib, or he would honestly admit it was stronger than he was, and never come back to it. In the autumn of 2018, Nardi began assembling a team for his 6th attempt, and quickly ran into one problem. The circle of possible partners had narrowed down to a handful of names. Most of those who had already climbed this route with him politely declined. Too many trips ending in nothing. Too hard to go back onto a wall where you already know every spot at which you'll have to turn around. He needed a fresh person. Tom Ballard's name came up almost on its own. Perfect technique on snow and ice, 6 north faces of the Alps, solo. Young, physically fresh, not tied to any commercial high-altitude operation. And, most importantly, he had long been looking for his first 8,000er, but he was waiting for a route that would mean something to him personally. Not yet another Everest by the normal route with a queue at the fixed ropes, but something rare. The two of them hadn't been close friends before. It was a working partnership put together for a specific route, built on mutual benefit. For Nardi, a chance to step outside his own circle of past failures, to bring in a man with a clean eye. For Tom, a chance to walk into the winter Himalaya for the first time, and to step straight onto one of the hardest walls on the planet. Tom agreed without much hesitation. He left the van in the Alps, said goodbye to his father and sister, and flew to Pakistan. By the end of December 2018, the expedition was already working the approaches under the Diamir face. In the first days of January, the 2-man team set up base camp. From the second half of January, they began working their way up the rib, The tactics were classic for a big Himalayan wall. You climb up, set a high camp, descend to rest. You climb again, set the next one, fix ropes on the key sections. Each new cycle pushes a couple of 100 meters higher. The windows between storms were short, 2 or 3 working days at most. By the middle of February, Nardi and Tom had pushed their third camp up to roughly 6,000 meters and were approaching the steepest section of the rib, the very zone where all of Nardi's previous expeditions had ended. Beyond that began ground he had never been on. On the 22nd of February 2019, they left the third camp heading up. The goal? To reconnoiter the approaches to a fourth camp, and, if things went well, to spend a night there. On the 23rd, they were still on the radio. The voices coming through sounded calm. The 48-hour forecast promised quiet weather. Sunday, the 24th of February, around midday local time, a short message comes through to base camp. Nardi reads out the altitude coordinates, roughly 6,300 meters between the third camp and the site for the fourth. For this route and for winter, that's very high. Nardi himself had never been that high on any of his previous attempts. By the time of the radio call, the weather forecast had already changed. By night, the meteorologists were expecting a storm from the northwest. Base camp passed the new data up to the pair and asked them to start descending right after the short scouting push. Nardi confirmed he had heard. The radio call ended normally. The next morning, the airwaves were silent. Not in the morning window, not in the day window, not in the evening one. The radio at base camp was switched on and off every half hour. No answer. By that point, the mountain was already partly hidden by cloud. The 26th of February, silence again. A solid weather front hanging over the wall. Wind at altitude over 100 kilometers per hour. Searching was impossible, neither from the ground nor from the air. That day base camp did the thing that gets done in the mountains very reluctantly. They contacted the families and the National Mountaineering Federations. Nardi and Ballard's 2-man team was officially declared missing. The news spread through the climbing world within hours. The Basque mountaineer Alex Chiquian, known for his winter attempts on Everest without oxygen, agreed to coordinate the search operation. At that moment, he himself was standing on K2, preparing for his own winter attempt. He heard about Nanga Parbat, broke down his camp, and flew across the mountain region at short notice to reach Diamir. Among those who came to help look was Denis Urubko. Several Polish climbers flew in from nearby base camps. The Pakistani army provided helicopters and pilots who had flying hours at high altitudes in the Karakoram. The first week of March passed in a series of fly-arounds of the wall, each one pushed to the limit of altitude at which a machine can still hold in the cold, thin air. The pilots took the helicopters as close to the rib as the updraft off the rocks would allow. The storm would retreat for a few hours, then return, and each time the operation had to be cut short. From the ground, the search team scanned the route through powerful spotting scopes. Every snow shelf, every crack. For several days, nothing. No tent, no rope, no patch of color on the snow. The wall was empty. By the beginning of the second week, hope of finding the climbers alive was gone. On the morning of the 9th of March 2019, Chikan went up into the air with one of the Pakistani pilots for another fly-around. That day the weather gave them a rare opening. From the ground, the optics were working. A dark dot appeared in the field of view at roughly 5,900 meters. Not one, two. On a snow shelf, far off to the side of the line of ascent up the rib. There was almost no doubt Nardi and Tom Ballard. The position of the bodies spoke for itself. Both had died significantly higher up and had been thrown down together with a mass of snow. By every indication, in the zone where the pair had gone out scouting after their last radio call, a powerful slab avalanche had broken loose. The climbers had been swept several hundred meters down from above. That same day the news reached the families. Jim Ballard and Nardi's relatives in Italy received the official confirmation. A few hours later, both families made a short joint statement. They confirmed the deaths of the climbers and asked for the search operation to be called off. Continuing the search meant risking the lives of dozens of people. Nobody attempted to bring the bodies down. The altitude pushing 6,000, the avalanche danger in March, the state of the snow on the wall, and evacuation was out of the question. The two climbers were left on the mountain at roughly 5,900 meters, on the same face and a few hundred meters from the line of that very rib they had wanted to climb first. A few days later, Jim Ballard flew to Pakistan. He drove along the mountain road as far as a village in the Diamir Valley, and from there walked up to base camp. A small Buddhist ceremony was held for the two climbers. The lamas came with a group of Sherpas from the expedition, and prayer flags were strung between the stones. A ring of stones on the snow, facing the wall. Jim stood at the edge and looked up there, to where his son had stayed. The second such ceremony in his life. He had held the first one in Pakistan too, in 1995, after his wife's death on K2. Between the two moments, 24 years, and two different mountains in one country. The score on this route was opened by Mummery himself, back in 1895. After that, a long, empty page. Across the whole of the 20th century and the first 20 years of the 21st, nobody managed to take his line all the way to the end. In the winter of 2019, two men from different countries tried to close it first, and ended up being the latest names on the same list of the dead. By 2026, nothing has been added to that list, and nothing has been taken from it. The Mummery line lies on the Diamir face the same as it was when the Briton first saw it 130 years ago. Daniele Nardi was 43, Tom Ballard was 30. Two men step onto the longest ridge of any 8,000er on the planet, 10 kilometers of rock and snow above 7,000 meters. Before them, no one had ever tried this route the way they were doing it, just the two of them, no fixed ropes, no Sherpas. They carry a satellite phone and a GPS tracker that pings a point onto the internet every few hours. The 23rd of June, 2017, the southwestern face of Nanga Parbat. The tracker drops one last coordinate onto the map and falls silent. Almost 9 years later, that dot is still there. Nothing else of these two men remains on this earth. June 2017. Base camp at the foot of the southwestern side of Nanga Parbat. 2 tents, a gas stove, clothes hung out to dry. Two men who know exactly what they're doing. The older one is Alberto Zerain, a Basque, born in the Basque country. By this point, he has already stood on top of all 14 8,000ers on the planet, the full list. In the climbing world, they call him the Quiet Hammer. No advertising, no cameras on tripods at base camp, no social media from the mountain. He worked quietly, away from the spotlight. He is 55. For that level, this is still a working age. 14 8,000ers in the legs do not just write themselves off. The younger one is Mariano Galván, an Argentine, 38 years old. Behind his back, the best teams in South America, serious walls in the Andes, work above 8,000. In a big team, he usually moves as the second on the rope, and he moves reliably. A good partner on a rope team, calm, durable, never pushing ahead just to get the dramatic shot. They had met long before 2017 and had taken their time sizing each other up. A climbing partnership is closer than a marriage. You hand another human being the route, and along with it, your chance of staying alive. Pairings like this do not come together in a single season. They came to this mountain not for the summit. Zerain already has the summit, and not just one. The goal is the route. It has a name, the Mazeno Ridge, and above all, the way they intend to do it, the two of them, Alpine style, no Sherpas on the route, no fixed ropes set in advance by guides, no high camps with food and oxygen ferried up by an organized supply chain. Everything they take, they carry on their own backs, on their own feet, from the first stone to the main summit and back down. This is not a tourist expedition. This is an attempt to do something on the mountain that no one before them has ever done. The route itself deserves a closer look on its own. The Mazeno Ridge stretches toward the main summit of Nanga Parbat from the southwestern side. This side of the mountain is the unglamorous side. Films and photo albums rarely show it. There are no classic routes here, and commercial groups are not led this way. A jagged chain of sharp peaks, with almost nothing flat between them. There is nothing else like it for length on any 8,000er, not one of the long ones, the longest. Along the way stand several distinct summits, the Mazeno Peaks, each one above 7,000 meters, each with its own elevation gain, its own risk, and all of that has to be crossed before you even begin the final push to the main summit. Before 2017, the ridge had been traversed in full only once, in 2012, not a pair. A combined team of several climbers and high-altitude Sherpas. Weeks of work, camps stocked in advance, fixed ropes on the key sections. The load was passed forward in turns. The team moved up along ropes that were already in place. That is the siege style, methodically biting the mountain off in pieces, with a safety net at every step. Zerain and Galván were going to do it differently. Just the two of them, with the bare minimum of gear. No rope infrastructure behind them. No option to retreat down the fixed lines. No one had ever tried the long ridge this way. In the 90s, several teams ventured onto individual sections of the ridge. Every one of them turned back long before the main summit, without even reaching the middle of the route. What these two are planning in June 2017 is an attempt that no one before them has ever carried through to the end. If it works. Alpine style is not really about how you move. It is an ideology. The core principle. Everything you are going to need, you carry now. Nobody is hanging above you as your safety net. If you turn back, you descend the same snow you climbed up. If you do not make it, no one is bringing you oxygen up to 7,000 meters. On a short route, this works. On 10 kilometers of ridge above 7,000 meters, this becomes the mathematics of survival. Every extra kilogram of gear slows you down, and slow movement at altitude kills you. The longer you sit in the death zone above 8,000, the faster your body falls apart. Sleep does not restore you. Food is not absorbed. Every night eats into your reserves. The window of good weather on Nanga Parbat in summer rarely stretches longer than 5 or 6 days in a row, sometimes less. To make it inside that window, you have to move very fast and almost never stop. Zerain weighs his strength, his experience, his speed, and decides it is possible. If they move fast, if they do not linger, if the weather holds. Galván agrees. They prepare the route for a full year. They break down every notch on the ridge from photographs, every rock tower looking for names. They read the reports from the 2012 expedition, everything that exists. They speak to people who have seen the Mazeno from the ground. In base camp, their gear is minimal, a light 2-person tent, gas, food for the planned number of days, a rope only for the most dangerous pitches, personal equipment. For communication, a satellite phone and a small GPS tracker. The tracker sends their coordinates to the internet on its own every few hours. Anyone with a laptop can open a map and see 2 dots, where the pair was yesterday, where they are now. This tracker will end up playing a role no one is anticipating. On the 19th of June, 2017, the pair sets off on the route. The first days go to plan. The lower section of the ridge, the 6,000-meter saddles, a stretch of stable weather. The GPS tracker drops its dots onto the online map without fail. From them, you can see. The schedule is tight, no breakdowns, no delays. In Spain and Argentina, friends, relatives, journalists open the map several times a day. The dot is moving. Everything is fine. The dot has been still for a while, a bivouac or rest. The dot is moving again. Morning, they are climbing. A new way to live through someone else's ascent. Not a radio check-in once a day, but an almost live feed of geographic coordinates. On the 23rd of June, the pair reaches a section around 6,000 meters. This part of the ridge is relatively low, but it is known to be avalanche-prone. On the maps left by the 2012 team, this exact area is marked as one of the most nerve-wracking. Wide-open slopes, accumulating fresh snow, very few places for a safe bivouac. By this point, local bad weather is moving into the mountains. A warm, wet flow from the southwest. Wet snow, a fresh layer settling over older ice slopes. A textbook avalanche setup. The upper layer does not have time to bond with the lower one, and a dangerous film of weakness sits between them. In the night going into the 24th of June, the tracker sends its next coordinate, and then it sends nothing more. At first, nobody is really alarmed. At altitude, batteries freeze and lose capacity. The antenna ends up in the shadow of a slope. The signal drops out for a few hours, then comes back. Everyone following the route waits. After a full day of silence, anxiety sets in. No coordinates. The satellite phone is silent. After 2 days, fear sets in. In the climbing chats, in the news outlets of the Basque Country and Argentina, the same word slowly begins to appear. First the careful phrasing, out of contact, then missing. The Pakistani army puts 2 high-altitude helicopters in the air. a flyover of the area of the last GPS fix. Coordination is partly taken over by Alex Chaikon, a Basque climber who is working on another route in the region at that very moment. He already has experience organizing the search for a missing rope team on this same mountain. He knows whom to call, how to negotiate with pilots, how to look from above for something almost impossible to see. From the air, the pilots see the very thing they feared most. Below the point of the last signal, along the likely line of movement of the rope team, runs a fresh avalanche debris field. A huge mass of wet snow has broken loose from the upper slopes and run down a couloir. The size is monstrous. Several hundred meters long, as wide as a multi-story building. The surface is broken, lumpy, with the marks of fresh snow that has not yet had time to settle and smooth out. On the surface, nothing. No backpack, no scrap of rope, no dark stain of clothing, no sign that the avalanche threw anything out. A few days later, a ground team climbs up to the lower part of the avalanche cone. They climb as high as the altitude, the weather, and their own safety allow. They probe what can be probed. The long, thin probes sink into the snow to their full length and strike only snow. The search lasts a week and is wound down. The ridge is too long, the avalanche debris is too deep, and below it is a glacier full of crevasses hidden under a layer of fresh snow. There is no chance of finding anyone alive. The chance of finding a body is vanishingly small. The official version fits into a single sentence. The rope team was hit by an avalanche in the area of 6,000 meters. The bodies were swept down the couloir and pulled into the glacier crevasses beneath the debris. As of 2026, almost 9 years later, Alberto Zerain and Mariano Galván have still not been found. The bodies have not been found either. From the rope team of Zerain and Galván, a few things remain. The last coordinate from the GPS tracker, still sitting on the servers of the satellite tracking service. Open the map, and it glows in the area around 6,000 meters on the southwestern ridge. A handful of photographs from base camp. In the most well-known ones, 2 men beside a tent, in down jackets, both smiling into the camera. The shots were taken a few days before they set off, the last frames in which both of them are alive and in view. Short entries in the expedition diaries. They were found later among the things left behind at base camp. The gear that was not carried up onto the ridge. Everyday notes, calculations on food supplies, sketches of the daily schedule. There are no films about them. There are no documentary projects with interviews of the rescuers and the families. No one has written a book. In the wider climbing literature, this attempt appears as a single short line. Zerain, Galván, Mazeno Ridge, Alpine style, missing, presumed dead. Names, route, style, status, that is all. After June 2017, no one has tried to cross the Mazeno Ridge in Alpine style as a pair. The very idea of crossing this ridge as a pair, traveling light, has become an almost forbidden subject in the community. Out loud, no one says it cannot be done, but nobody goes. The only complete traverse of the ridge still belongs to the 2012 team, which moved in siege style, over weeks, with a large group. And on the open internet, the page of the satellite service is still there, with the history of their trackers' movements. The green line of the route runs along the ridge, by day, by hour, and then breaks off sharply in the night, going into the 24th of June, 2017. The coordinate has not moved. That, in the end, is all there is. A jacket and gloves sticking out of compacted snow. That is all they will find of Gabi. The bodies themselves, the mountain will not give back. On June 20th, 1996, in the upper camp on the Diamir face of Nanga Parbat, 2 Romanians are sitting, Răzvan Petcu and Gabi Stana. 3 of their teammates, Mihai Cioroianu, Marius Gane, and Bogdan Pintilie, began the descent to base camp 24 hours earlier. While they are moving down, up above the pair is waiting for a weather window to make a second summit attempt. They have no satellite phone, no tracker. A small private team from Eastern Europe in 1996 has only a stationary radio down below, where they are not, and their own boots in the snow. In the next few hours, something will happen between the 2 camps that the country will spend weeks trying to reconstruct. To understand how 2 Romanians ended up alone on this mountain, you have to step back 7 years. December 1989. Revolution, the Ceausescu regime. falls. The country comes out of socialist isolation. By 1996, Romanian capitalism is in its fifth year. The economy is finding its feet. The Carpathian Climbing School has existed since the interwar period. It is strong. Generations of climbers have grown up in it. But access to the 8,000ers was delayed for Romania by decades. Hard currency for distant expeditions was not allocated. Foreign travel was controlled. By this point, the Poles have already played out their chapter of Himalayan climbing, the Italians theirs. Romania is still in the queue. Before 1996, no Romanian had climbed Nanga Parbat. The idea of a national expedition comes together from the bottom up. No travel agency, no Sherpas, no porters, on the personal money of 5 people. Marius Gain would later say it plainly. At that time, there was no mandatory agency. The expedition was organized by the climbers themselves to cut costs. There are 5 of them. Răzvan Petcu, 41, the initiator and leader. The Pamirs and the Caucasus behind him, at that moment finishing his book, Visul Peretelui de Gheață, The Dream of the Ice Wall. The manuscript will stay in a drawer. Gabriel Stana, Gabi to everyone, in his early 20s, from Șempălung in Argeș County, a student at the University of Bucharest, unmarried. Mihai Cioroianu, 28, from Bucharest, in the mountains since the age of 14, a graduate of the Grăvița Climbing School. Marius Gain, also from Argeș County, who had been on peaks above 6,000 meters in the Karakoram. Bogdan Pintelie is the 5th. About Gabi, there survives a brief portrait that Gain would give much later. He was very ambitious and persistent, an excellent climber, and very strong. He probably carried more than anyone and broke trail more than the rest, one of the peaks of his generation. Had he survived, he would certainly have become one of the best Romanian Himalayan climbers. On May 10, 1996, the team reaches the foot of Nanga Parbat from the Pakistani side. Base camp is set on the western approach at around 4,000 meters, at the foot of the Diamir face. The route is Kinshofer, the classic line up this face, opened by the Germans in the 60s. May and early June are spent on acclimatization and fixing ropes, and the camps go up gradually. 1, 2, 3. Above base camp, they have no porters. Everything rests on their own shoulders. Tents, gas, ropes, food. They take turns carrying. The Diamir side is avalanche-prone. Its snow cornices live a life of their own. They chose it anyway for the smaller vertical drop compared to the southern side. Between June 17th and 19th, the pair of Cioroianu and Gabi go up for a summit push. They reach roughly 8,050 meters. Less than 100 vertical meters remain to the summit. At that point, a storm hits the ridge with such force that they have to turn around immediately. They head down. Part of the team descends to base camp to rest. Petcu and Stana decide differently. Stay in Camp 3, wait out the bad weather up high, and try again without losing their acclimatization. Every extra day at altitude is more snow, piling up above their tent on the slope. At the time, it looks like a reasonable choice between fatigue and a chance. What it really turns out to be, neither of them will live to find out. On June 20th, the silence on the radio begins before anyone down below realizes it is silence. The exact time is not recorded. According to some sources, the avalanche caught them near Camp 3. According to others, between Camp 3 and base camp, somewhere in the upper section of the route. Both versions involve an avalanche. From base camp, they call them on the radio several times. No answer. One day, a second, a third. Losing communication in the mountains is ordinary. The antenna gets buried, the battery goes cold, a storm jams the signal. Down below they wait. On the 4th day, the waiting becomes heavy. On the 5th, it is clear there is no point in listening any longer. They have to go up and look. The rescue party is the same 3 who came down earlier. Cioroianu, Gane, and Pintelie leave base camp and move upward along the route. They climb the familiar fixed ropes, read the slope, look for any sign of people. At a certain height, they find what leaves no room for doubt. A huge avalanche cone, a compressed tongue of snow blocking the way. From this mass protrude Gabi's down jacket and his gloves. Nothing else. No backpack, no rope, no boot. Digging out tons of that mass by hand, at this altitude, with 3 men, there is nothing to even try. They take what they have found and go down. The mountain will keep the two of them. From Pakistan to Bucharest, the news travels along a chain, and the chain is long. The message from base camp is written down and passed to Pakistani liaisons, who carry it down to the nearest valley. From there, by telex or telephone, through diplomatic channels, to the embassy in Islamabad, then to the foreign ministry in Bucharest, then to the newsrooms. Between the event on the slope and the moment the country learns of it, days pass. Gabi's parents in Simpalung get the news through an official notification. That is simply how life worked in that era. A person went into the mountains, and sometimes all that came back was a message passed through 10 pairs of hands. The newspapers of the 90s write briefly, 2 Romanians killed on Nanga Parbat. On July 5, 1996, the expedition is officially closed. The 3 survivors returned to Bucharest without 2 of their teammates. About 2 years after the tragedy, a man who had never been a climber comes to the mountain. It is Gabi's father. He travels from Simpalung through Bucharest, Islamabad, and the valley to the base camp on the Diamir side, to the place where his son spent his last weeks. There he places a memorial plaque with 2 names, a simple plaque, no ceremony, no audience. In that same year, 1997, Mihai Cioroianu returns to Nanga Parbat as part of a Spanish group. He brings the elderly father up with him as far as base camp. He himself goes higher and reaches the summit. It is the first Romanian ascent of this mountain, and Cioroianu dedicates it to his 2 fallen teammates. One climbs up, the other stays below, by the plaque. 2 years after that climb, Cioroianu himself will be gone. On July 10, 1999, on K2, at around 5,800 meters, he is caught by rockfall. His injuries proved incompatible with life. 31 years old, his daughter Ioana, 3.5. Of the 5 men who set out for Nanga Parbat in 1996, within 3 years, only 2 remain alive. In 2003, the book by Răzvan Petcu finally appears in Bucharest, The Dream of the Ice Wall. The manuscript lay for 7 years after his death before it became a cover and a print run. This is the first generation of Romanian Himalayan climbers, and it pays dearly for its short chapter. The door to the 8,000ers is open, but next to that door, over the course of 3 years, they lose first Petcu, then Stana, then Cioroianu, one after another. On July 19, 2013, Marius Gain stands on the summit of Nanga Parbat. By that point, he already has Everest and Gasherbrum II behind him. A different route, a different side of the mountain, a different team. The same mountain. Of all those who came here in 1996, the man finally standing on this summit is the one who remembers the faces of both of the dead. On the descent, he would later say one sentence that entered the Romanian climbing archives. Sub zăpadă erau camarazii mei, m-am cutremurat. Under the snow lay my comrades. I shuddered. 17 years, the distance from the avalanche cone to this summit. No one ever found the bodies of Răzvan Petcu and Gabi Stana. 4 things remain of them: a down jacket and gloves in the snow, a memorial plaque at base camp, a book on shelves in Bucharest, and one sentence from the man who got there for them. In the summer of 2009, the Korean networks SBS and KBS opened their evening broadcasts with the very same story. 2 women from one country were chasing a title no woman had ever held before, the first to climb all 14 8,000ers on the planet. Oh Yoon-soon and Go Mi-yeong. The age gap between them was just a couple of years, both around 40. Their styles on the mountain were different. From the outside, it looked like a sporting contest. On the inside, it was a race. And in that same race were the Spaniard Edurne Pasaban, the Italian Nives Meroy, and the Austrian Gerlinde Kaltenbrunner. Each had her own tally of summits, her own expedition schedule, her own sponsors and film crews, contracts, morning television, a future book. School children in Seoul recognized the 2 women on the street. By July of 2009, Go Mi-yeong had 11 summits from the list behind her. Ahead of her lay a narrow strip of ridge in western Pakistan, a stretch where no team ever fixes ropes. In 1967, in a small town called Busan on the southwestern coast of Korea, a girl was born with the surname Go. The family was rural, not a climbing family and not a sporting one. Her parents worked the land. The walk to school took 40 minutes. the same coming back, every day, in any weather. In a Korean village in the 1960s, that was simply normal. No one called it a strain. Years later, she would say in an interview that the endurance she needed for the future 8,000 meters came from there, from those morning walks across the hills, not from a climbing wall, and not from any coach's training plan. After school came Seoul and the civil service. 12 years in an office at the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry. Quiet work, a fixed salary. From 1991, she began visiting the climbing wall at the Köln Climbing School, training 3 times a week, then 4, then every single day. From 1995 to 2003, 9 national championship titles in a row, 6 Asian Cups, 5th place in the world, ranking for sport climbing. From 2002, she added ice climbing to the list, 4th place at the World Championship, 5th at the World Cup. By the age of 40, her body began to protest against the dynamic loads of the climbing wall. She made her decision quietly, to go up, into altitude. In 2004, she went into the Himalayas for the first time, to Mount Drapika at 6,447 meters, a training altitude for the bigger expeditions to come. The result was not what coaches expected from a newcomer. At the age of 38, she officially crossed over into high-altitude mountaineering, a late age. Most Himalayan stars of her generation were closing their careers by then. She was only starting. October of 2006. The Tibetan Plateau, Cho Oyu, 8,201 meters. The first 8,000er of her life, climbed without what would soon become her team. In the spring of 2007, she made a phone call to Kim Jae-soo, 44 years old by that point with Everest, K2, Lhotse behind him, and a reputation as one of the toughest Korean team leaders. The request was simple, take her to Everest. He had his doubts. She had only one summit to her name. She insisted in one short phrase. I can do it. He agreed. From that phone call until the day she died, they climbed rope together, 10 8,000ers side by side. In 2007, she climbed Everest in May, Broad Peak in July, and Shishapangma in October, the first Korean woman with 3 8,000ers in a single calendar year. In 2008 came Lhotse, K2, and Manaslu. She went up K2 in August of that season, the season in which 3 climbers from a neighboring roped party died on the descent. She stayed on her feet and stayed on plan. Her sponsor, Köln Sports, renamed the team Köln Sports Challenge Team and funded the next expedition before the previous one had even come home. In the spring of 2009, in 6 weeks, she stood on 3 new summits. The 1st of May, Makalu, the 18th of May, Kangchenjunga, the 8th of June, Dhaulagiri, 3 8,000ers in a single Himalayan season, a world record for women in terms of density. By the end of June, she had 10 of the 14. Nanga Parbat, Annapurna, and the 2 Gasherbrum were left. The team did not go back to Seoul to rest. From Nepal, she went straight on to Pakistan. At the end of June, in the year 2009, the team set up base camp on the glacier beneath the western wall of the mountain. The face is known as the Diamir side. The route was the standard one, the same line nearly every team uses to come up. A long technical step in the lower section, a shoulder at around 7,000 meters, and the upper snow slope. The roster. Go Mi-yeong as climber, Kim Jae-soo as leader. The porters, the cooks, the doctor, the reporters with their satellite modem, and a small film crew. An Italian team was working at a neighboring camp. Among them was Giuseppe Pompili, who later left written testimony. According to his notes, the Korean woman was moving strongly, evenly, without any breaks in pace. The weather forecast for the end of the first 10 days of July showed a short window of only 1 day. The decision was made 24 hours in advance. On the night of the 9th of July, the team left Camp 4 at an altitude of around 7,300 meters. Bottled oxygen was on. The 10th of July, morning and day. The climb up the upper snow shield. Light haze, wind at the very edge of what was acceptable. At about 6 o'clock in the evening local time, Go Mi-yeong stepped onto the summit of Nanga Parbat, 8,126 meters, the 11th 8,000er of her career. Satellite contact with base camp. From there to the Köln Sports office in Seoul, from there to the newsrooms. The story went out onto the Korean internet around the Korean middle of the night and ran across the wires as a victory. They don't go down right away. After 15 hours of work on the ridge, the team decided to spend the night at Camp 4. Fatigue had been building quietly, without any sharp signal. At that altitude, the body does not recover. It only breaks down more slowly. 2 of them in a tent. Outside, the wind pressed against the fabric. Through the satellite modem, the first congratulatory messages from Seoul reached base camp. The journalists already knew about the 11th 8,000er, and the Kolan Sports newsroom had posted a short statement on its website. On the morning of the 11th of July, they head down. The weather deteriorated faster than the forecast had promised. The wind picked up. Visibility dropped to about 100 meters. Between Camp 3 and Camp 2, there is a section that Korean mountaineers call the Knife Edge Ridge, a strip 10 to 20 meters across with a drop on either side. The rock underneath is brittle. Protection does not hold. By tradition, no team fixes ropes there. Every party crosses it on its own, without a permanent safety line, on pure balance and experience. 15 hours earlier, she had been standing on the summit. Now beneath her boots was the same place, the kind that in previous seasons had been crossed without losses, but always in clear weather. At around 6:30 in the evening local time, Mi-yeong was moving along the ridge together with her partners. About 100 meters remained to the tents of Camp 2. A sudden gust of wind, a step on unreliable snow on that narrow strip, a fall. The climbers walking next to her saw her go and immediately got on the radio to base camp. The altitude at the point of the fall was around 6,200 meters. Below the ridge, there was a steep drop on the western side. Base camp sent a short message by satellite to Islamabad, to the Korean embassy. A few hours later, it was lying on a desk in a Seoul newsroom. On the 12th of July, a search helicopter from a Pakistani civilian operator working under Army contract climbed along the western wall. Her body was found about 100 meters above Camp 1, off the line of the fall. One detail made it into the Korean papers the next day. She lay facing the summit. On the 13th of July, they took her down on a cable and flew her to Islamabad, from there to Seoul by plane. Her family met the flight at night. On the 21st of July, Mi-yeong was cremated in Korea. At the time of her death, she was 42. The reaction in the country ran along 2 streams. One was mourning. State television gave over half-hour memorial programs. Interviews aired with her old school friends from Busan and with her coaches from the Kolan climbing school. The second stream was arithmetic. The journalists counted summits. Mi-yeong had 11. Her compatriot Oh Yoon-sun, as of the summer of 2009, had 12. In April of 2010, Oh Yoon-sun announced she had closed all 14. Her Kangchenjunga of 2009 would later be rejected by the Korean Alpine Federation. The record would remain disputed. In May of 2010, the Basque Spaniard Edurne Pasaban closed her 14th summit and was named the first woman to complete the list by Explorer's Web. The race that Mi-yeong had entered as the 11th in line was finished without her. A few weeks after the funeral, Kim Jae-soo said in public what no one had expected from him. He would go up the 3 remaining peaks for her, not as the continuation of his own career. He kept his own tally, and he did not fold his own peaks into someone else's list. He would do it as an obligation he takes on himself. The team was called the Kolan Sports Challenge Team. The team had had a plan, and the plan was going to be carried out. At first, the family wanted to scatter part of her ashes on those 3 mountains. After a conversation with the elders, they decided otherwise. The ashes would stay in Korea, and on each of the 3 summits, a photograph of her would be left in a sealed bag. In the autumn of 2009, Annapurna. In the spring of 2010, Gasherbrum 1 and Gasherbrum 2. Coming down from the third of them, Kim Jae-soo sent a single line back to Seoul. The list of 14 is closed. Closed not by Mi-yeong, closed for her. Kolan Sports established an annual youth sport climbing competition in her name, the Mi-yeong Cup. The tournament is still held every summer in Seoul. The first generations of the country's national climbing squad came through it, including the future world champion Kim Ja-in. In Korea, the nickname Iron Woman stayed with her. In the mountaineering reference books, her entry is short, 11 8,000ers in 2 years and 9 months, a world record for women in season density. On the western wall of Nanga Parbat, that same strip between Camp 3 and Camp 2 is still there. Fixed protection has still not been put on it. Every team on the standard route still crosses it the same way, each time anew, on its own balance. By the moment of the fall, she was the Asian champion in sport climbing, the high-altitude student of Kim Jae-soo's school, and one of 4 women on the planet, with 3 names left to 14. On the table in her sole apartment, a short handwritten line was left behind. Annapurna, Gasherbrum 1, Gasherbrum 2. Those 3 names, in the year 2010, would be written out by a different hand. In the winter of 2013, a young Frenchman arrived at the foot of the largest mountain wall on the planet. He traveled light, no partner, no oxygen, ropes unnecessary. On his back, a rucksack, an ice axe, a satellite transmitter, and a snowboard. His name was Joel Wiśniewski, 29 years old. Not a veteran of winter 8000ers, not a star of glossy magazines, not part of a large national expedition. Just a man with an idea that almost no one before him had spoken aloud, to climb the Rupal Face alone in winter and descend from the summit on a snowboard. On the 6th of February, he would post a short entry on his website. "I have 3 days." It would turn out to be the last anyone heard from him alive. The major mountaineering publications wrote little about him, a Frenchman with a surname of Polish origin, born in the mountainous part of France, raised on ski and snowboard slopes. By profession, a freeride snowboarder and a climber, 2 pursuits that usually run in parallel. Joel merged them into a single project. He ran a small personal website, steepboard.fr, a blog with route photographs and notes on equipment, his own quiet audience with no loud marketing. He did not travel for the sake of a famous name. He traveled because he wanted to test an idea, that a man on a board could come down from an 8000er along the very line he had just climbed on his own feet. Before him, no one had ever made a serious snowboard descent of Nanga Parbat. Winter on this mountain is a world of its own. Wind on the ridge at 200 kilometers an hour, temperatures below -40. Avalanche risk so severe that the entire massif effectively ceases to be passable by the standards of summer climbing. By the start of 2013, no human being had ever climbed here in winter. That boundary would stand for another 3 years. The logic of solitude here is harshly pragmatic. On a wall 4.5 kilometers high, a roped pair works almost the same as a soloist, only slower and with more weight. The logic of a new variant of the route is of the same nature. The classic lines of the Rupal Face demand a team, weeks of work, and a network of camps. A solo climber can only attempt a narrow, unconventional rib. Joel was counting on speed, to climb in a window of clear weather, drop down on the board, get home. He left France at the very end of December 2012. The road runs through Islamabad, Gilgit, Astor, the usual Karakoram approach to the southern foot of the mountain. Already on the way, Joel began to suffer from stomach pain, a bacterial or viral infection that would torment him for the entire expedition. In the village of Tarashing, the last point of civilization before base camp, he spent several days waiting for delayed luggage. The pain did not let go. On the 9th of January 2013, he reached base camp at the foot of the Rupal Face, at roughly 4,000 meters. Nearby lies a small mountaineering graveyard, the Herrlichkoffer Cemetery, where those who did not return from this place are buried. With him, only a liaison officer, no team, no support network, stomach pain, and the wall. He wasn't the only one on the mountain that winter. The 2012 to 2013 season brought several teams to Nanga Parbat at once. A French and Italian pair was working on the western side of the mountain, on a completely different route and a different wall. A Polish team and an Italian and German party of 3 had started from the Rupal side along the classic shell route. Their base camps were in different valleys, separated by tens of kilometers of detour and by a mountain impassable in winter. Some of these people were physically nearby, only a few hours of walking away. But Joel was not with them. He did not use their fixed ropes, did not share their depots, did not come on the radio. That was his own choice. No help, no link between camps, no other human voice on the same frequency. Many tried that winter. None of them reached the summit. One disappeared. January was spent on the slow installation of 2 lower camps. The first, at 4,150 meters, the second, at 4,300. By the standards of an 8,000er, these are still approaches, a warm-up. The main wall lies ahead. Joel worked according to a high-altitude photographer's schedule. Photo documentation of every outing, reports on the website, brief packets over satellite link. On the 25th of January, his battery charger broke. Without charging, the communications die, the photography dies, and the project itself turns into a blind movement. He descended back to the village of Rupal at 3,500 meters, replaced the charger, and went back up. On flat ground, he lost almost a week. Within his dry, methodical logic, this was not a disaster, but a problem solved. He climbed back to the camps and continued. On the 1st of February, Joel again left base camp for the upper mountain. The plan was simple. Top up the acclimatization, step above the second camp, scout the pylon, go for the summit push. But the first days of February, the wall sat in a storm. Visibility down to 0, wind on the ridge above 50 knots, snow squalls coming one after another. He stayed in the tent at 4,300, alone, without a radio on which he could speak to another living person. Short marks appeared on the website: altitude, wind, the state of the snow. With each day, the text became drier and shorter. He was saving battery, saving strength, writing nothing unnecessary. Somewhere down below, his family was reading him. Somewhere in Poland and in Italy, other teams were watching the same barometer and waiting for a gap. On the 6th of February, the barometer suggested a break for several days. Joel left the second camp, moving higher. A final entry went up on the website. Going up from Camp 2. The central pylon and the wall are too dry. I will try the southeast pylon. I have 3 days. Take care of yourselves. Thank you for following. The word dry in his vocabulary meant something very specific. On the wall, there are no snow cushions, the ice is bare, the rock is exposed. The grip becomes unpredictable, the snow load slides in unexpected directions, and the risk of the board breaking loose in such a state of the wall is constant. The southeast pylon was a fallback, not the main option. He took the decision to change the line already up there, based on the condition of the wall. 3 days was his own deadline. In 3 days he was supposed to come back on the air. On the 9th of February, nothing from him. On the 10th, the same. The site steepboard.fr stopped updating. On the other side of the screen, emptiness. On the 16th of February, Joel was officially declared missing. The French embassy in Islamabad launched a rescue operation through the Pakistani authorities. But in winter, climbing above the second camp on this wall is impossible. Search parties did not go higher than 4,300. Wind, avalanche load, storm waves rolling in, one after another. Aerial reconnaissance tried to work, but the weather did not allow it. The wall was covered now by cloud, now by a snow squall. By the end of February, the search was wound down. From now on, only waiting for the wall to open, and that would happen in half a year. The winter season of 2013 on Nanga Parbat remained without a summit and without Joel. The Poles turned back from 7,400, the French and Italian pair from 6,450. Everyone who came to the mountain that winter walked away from it alive. Everyone except one, whose coordinates broke off at the southeast pylon. Down below, an open question remained without an answer. March, April, May, June, July, August. The valley lived its ordinary life. On the website steepboard.fr, the last entry from the 6th of February hung without another. The family in France lived in the gap between hope is gone and hope will not let go. Without a body, the status is unclear. Formally, a person is simply missing. Between the event on the slope and confirmation, 8 months. 8 months of silence up above. This is not a quick tragedy with an evacuation in 2 days, and not a radio message from camp. This is slow, drawn-out waiting, with no full stop. At the beginning of September 2013, the snow on the upper part of the glacier began to melt. Local residents from the villages of the Rupal Valley were passing along the edge of the ice field on their ordinary business, and noticed climbing equipment in the snow that had opened up. They understood to whom it might belong. There had been no other missing climbers on the Rupal Face that season. The villagers came down into the valley and sent a message to the French embassy in Islamabad. The embassy contacted Joel's family in France. The family gave permission for the body to be evacuated. Retired Brigadier General Akram Khan, a representative of the Adventure Foundation Pakistan, assembled a team of local porters and liaison officers. The group went up to the place where the villagers had seen the equipment. On the 10th of October, 2013, the team brought Joel down from an altitude of about 6,100 meters, at the foot of an ice cascade. The ice axe was still with him. From the position of the equipment, it was clear that he had been moving along the route. The identification was made by liaison officer Fida Hussein and a local guide from the village of Rupal, Abdul Rauf. The cause of death, an avalanche somewhere around 6,000 meters. Most likely he had been swept higher along the line of the route and remained at the foot of the cascade until the thaw in September. In accordance with his wish made in life, Joel was buried at the Herligkoffer Cemetery at 4,000 meters, beside other names of this valley. Above the grave stands the very line he had been climbing, a stone, a name, dates, and the wall behind. In October 2015, 2 years after the funeral, by the same approach from Torishing, along which Joel had gone up in January of 2013, his family climbed into the mountains, his father Hubert, his mother Miriam, and his 2 sisters. They walked the trail to the very stone bearing their son's name. This is not a tourist pilgrimage. It is serious mountain work. Altitude, the trail, acclimatization, a multi-day approach. In gratitude to those who had brought down the body and helped with the burial, the family paid for the installation of solar panels on roughly 40 houses in the surrounding villages. Electricity came to where there had been none. Light came on in the windows of the very families who had helped to bring their son back. With this, the story of Joel Wiśniewski closes, without a loud frame, without pathos. Only a trail, a grave at the foot of the wall, and 40 roofs under one sky. The 3rd of July, 2025, early morning. A short news item moves through climbing channels out of Pakistan. On Nanga Parbat, a Czech mountaineer's oxygen cylinder has allegedly exploded, and she has fallen off the mountain. Within a few hours, that single line is in the Czech press, in Pakistan's Pamir Times, in international feeds, and on Instagram. The name everywhere is the same: Klara Kolouchová, 46 years old, the first Czech woman to climb K2 and Kangchenjunga. By the evening of the same day, the expedition operator, the Nepali company 7 Summit Treks, releases a correction. There was no explosion. The sharp sound heard by those who were closest was her own oxygen cylinder striking the rock during the fall. The world had heard the consequence and taken it for the cause. The story of Klara begins after her death, with the fact that something untrue had been said about her. Klara Kolouchová was born on the 6th of September, 1978, in Prague. She grew up in a different country. Czechoslovakia broke apart when she was 14. In her early 20s, she earned a degree in business administration at the Anglo-American University in Prague, the first cohort of the program, class of 2001. After that, a career in communications, the agency Euro RSCG, then McKinsey, then government work in London. Until the age of 30, she was a PR manager in a buttoned-up office, not a climber. In 2006, at 28, she set foot on her first 8,000er, Cho Oyu, 8,188 meters, with a Nepali guide. A year later, on the 16th of May, 2007, she summited Everest and became the second Czech woman to stand on top of it. No one yet called this a new biography. An expensive hobby of a successful executive from Prague, nothing more. Then came a long pause with almost no big mountains in it. In 2008, her daughter Emma was born. In 2013, she married Martin Kolouch. In 2014, her son Kirill was born. 5 years without a single 8,000er. Small children, a job, an ordinary city family. In 2019, she came back. In the spring, Kangchenjunga, 8,586 meters, the first Czech woman on the 3rd highest mountain on the planet. That same summer, K2, 8,611 meters, the first Czech woman on her 3rd attempt. The 2 previous ones had ended without a summit. That expedition was made into a documentary film by the director Jana Pochtova, K2 Vlastní cesto, K2 My Own Way, premiered in the Czech Republic in the summer of 2020. From that moment, Klara became, for the first time, a public voice. Lectures, TEDx, 2 books, a face recognized across the country. By 2024, she had a label rare for a small country. The first Czech woman on the three highest mountains on the planet, Everest, K2, Kangchenjunga, plus Cho Oyu, a fourth 8,000er. In neighboring countries, the count is different. The Poles have an entire legendary generation. The Italians and Austrians have decades of high-altitude tradition. For the Czechs, in this field, big names are few, and women's names almost absent. That is why every climb of hers became national news in the Czech press. She herself framed it differently, a personal project, a long story about her own limits. Spring 2024. Klara climbed Annapurna 1, 8,091 meters, the 10th highest mountain on the planet and one of the most dangerous on the list of 8,000ers. The first Czech woman on Annapurna, the fifth such summit of her life. In the Czech press, she would later describe that climb briefly as 18 hours of hell. And she added another line that, a year later, everyone would quote, "The line between the summit and a safe return is incredibly thin." Those were her own words, spoken in 2024, not in hindsight. Nanga Parbat was a little over a year away. From the stage, she put the same thought more softly. Expeditions were her festive outings for intense experiences. That is how she herself described what she did. In the summer of that same 2024, straight after Annapurna, Klara traveled to Nanga Parbat for the first time. In Czech, this mountain is sometimes called Nahá Hora, the naked mountain, a literal translation from Hindi where Nanga means naked. The route was the classic one, the Diamir side. She did not reach the summit. The team turned back at the second high camp, around 6,200 meters. The weather did not let them higher. After returning, Klara published a line that the Czech public would remember. Her own wording. "Last year Nahá Hora stripped me bare, down to silence, down to peace, down to the soul." That is her quote, not the voice of journalists. The image was hers. She did not let the subject go. The decision was already made, to come back the following summer. It did not look like obsession. It looked more like a calm intention to settle an open account. On the 15th of June, 2025, Klara arrived in Pakistan with her team. The party included her husband Martin Kolouch, and 5 others, plus Sherpas from the Nepali operator 7 Summit Treks. 7 people in her own group. Martin would not go up the mountain. He stayed with the trekking party, walked with her as far as base camp, and waited for her there. On the 17th of June, the team reached Buner Base Camp on the Diamir side, at around 4,000 meters. The route was the Kinchofer, the same one by which Klara had reached 6,200 meters a year earlier. After that, the standard schedule. Rotations between camps, acclimatization, waiting for a weather window, no record ambitions. A calm commercial expedition with a tested team and a familiar operator. By the start of July, the window opened. The team set out for the summit push. On the night of the 2nd of July, Klara was already at the 4th high camp, around 7,100 meters. Above that point on the Diamir side, there is nothing. Only ice, rock, and wind. And there, something went wrong. There is no precise diagnosis in open sources. Altitude sickness, a drop in her condition, something she and her Sherpa considered serious. Klara made a careful decision. She gave up the summit push and turned back. Not the following morning, not hold on until daylight, but immediately in early descent. The rest of her group went up. With Klara stayed her personal Sherpa, Taraman Tamang, a guide from 7 Summit Treks. By any standard, this was the right call. Do not go higher if the body is already signaling. In the mountains, that kind of turnaround has saved lives more than once. The pair descended through the night. Around 4 in the morning, on the 3rd of July, they were passing through a rock section above the 2nd high camp, at an altitude of a little over 6,000 meters. This was not the summit ridge. This was the same wall Klara had climbed twice before, a year earlier and during acclimatization this season. A familiar place, familiar rock. At some moment, she found herself off the fixed ropes. A rock section, her foot on stone rather than along the lines, as it was just above or just below. Taraman Tamang saw her fall away to the side of the ropes. Somewhere during the fall, the oxygen cylinder on her back struck rock, From that contact came the sharp sound which, hours later, would turn in the first news reports into an explosion. The Sherpa came down alone. He had to carry the message down. In the morning, Taraman Tamang reached the second camp. From there, a radio call went down to base. From base to the 7 Summit Trek's office, to the family, to the Czech climbing channels. The Pakistani press, above all, Pamir Times from the Gilgit-Baltistan region, gave the first wording. The climber's oxygen cylinder had exploded. Within hours, the line spread around the world. Czech outlets, I Rajlas, Aktualnie, Blesk, Lidovky, published the same thing. Late that evening, a clarification went out from the operator's office. There had been no explosion on the mountain. The Czech climber Jan Travnicek confirmed this in the Czech press. The story was being rewritten almost on the air, but the first headline was already what people had read and remembered. 20 years ago, this storyline would not have existed at all. Today, both the speed of spreading and the speed of correction are measured in hours. The Pakistani authorities launched a search. An army helicopter went up. The ground team from 7 Summit Treks worked alongside the family. The deputy commissioner of Diamir district, named Nizamuddin, gave a dry note in the first 24 hours. The climber had fallen from an altitude between the first and second camps, around 4 in the morning, not far from Buner Base Camp. Karar Hydri, vice president of the Alpine Club of Pakistan, confirmed the start of the rescue operation. The body was not found, not in the first day, not in the days that followed. There was no way to establish precisely where down the wall she had been carried. Clara's Czech sponsor, the company High Point, published a short line in the style of an obituary. And so she rests forever in the embrace of the majestic Nanga Parbat. That is the wording of the brand which had dressed her for expeditions for many years, not the voice of the author of this script. For the family, it meant a simple thing. Her husband Martin and the 2 children, Emma at 17 and Kirill at 11, would not be able to bury her. There would be no grave for them to come to. And then began something that had not happened around the deaths of climbers of earlier generations. Czech social media split into 2 camps within the first day. One camp left sharp comments under photographs taken when she was still alive. They wrote things like, irresponsible mother, egotist, why climb an 8,000er if you have children? These are formulations taken from public comments, not the author's judgment. The other camp was her defense. The documentary maker Petr Horky reminded people she had known the risk, had spoken about it from the stage, and in her books had deceived no one. The journalist Magdalena Novachkova, in an essay for the magazine Respect, wrote the line that would frame the entire dispute. The value of life cannot be measured by safety alone. After her death, Klara Kolouchová turned out to be not only a mountaineer. Under her photographs, people would go on for a long time, arguing a question that was not really hers, whether a woman who is also a mother has the right to her own risk. She herself would no longer hear that conversation. High-altitude climbers know a simple thing. Stepping onto the summit of an 8,000er at 6 in the evening is late. You take the ridge before noon, so you have time to go down in daylight, while your legs still work and your hands still grip. On the 10th of July, 2009, at 10 minutes past 6 in the evening, a 55-year-old Austrian is nevertheless standing on the summit of Nanga Parbat. His name is Wolfgang Kölblinger. This is his 4th 8,000er, and he came down from the previous 3 on his own, alive. It is almost evening now, and a storm is rising from the Diamir Valley. Contact with base camp went dead an hour ago. The radio set in Camp 4 is silent, waiting for his voice. Traunkirchen, a small town on the western shore of Lake Traunsee in the Salzkammergut, Upper Austria, the Gmunden district. In summer, thousands of tourists come here. In winter, the streets empty out. A small church on the peninsula, boats at the piers, forest all around. Kölblinger is a forester by profession. In 1974, he graduated from the Forstschule Weidhofen an der Ybbs, the class of 1972 to 1974. His second role in the town is deputy mayor of Traunkirchen for the Austrian People's Party, the OVP. The budget of a small resort municipality, roads, forestry. At home, his wife Aloysia and a grown daughter. In his free time, big mountains. He belongs to the Gmunden section of the Österreichischer Alpenverein. By 2009, he had already climbed Shishapangma, Cho Oyu, and Broad Peak. The last of those was on the 2007 expedition. Those who climbed with him remembered him as a serious and companionable man with, in their words, diplomacy, humor, and a great thirst for life. In the summer of 2009, the Österreichischer Alpenverein put together a large international expedition with a double goal, first Nanga Parbat, then K2. It was led by the Styrian climber and mountain rescuer Gerfried Göschel. About 15 people ended up in camp. Austrians, a Canadian, a Swiss, 2 Britons, an Italian. Among the Austrians were Hans Goger, Sepp Bachmeier, Hans Wenzel, and the only woman, Michaela Landl. One expedition was running 2 different scenarios. A team of 5 led by Göschel and the Canadian Louis Rousseau was preparing a new route on the northwest buttress. 2,000 meters of technical ground, pure alpine style, no fixed camps, and no oxygen. The rest were going up the classic line on the Diamir side of the mountain, the usual siege style, with a chain of camps and fixed ropes on the key sections. Kölblinger was among the regular climbers on the classic route. They set base camp on a rocky moraine at the foot of the Diamir side at 4,000 meters. After that came the usual month of preparation that any 8,000er demands. Up to Camp 1, back down, rest. Up to Camp 2, back down. Up to Camp 3, back down again. That is how altitude is taken in steps, and the body has time to adjust to the thin air. By the start of July, a weather window opened over the mountain for 2 or 3 days. On July 9th, the summit team climbed to Camp 4 at about 7,100 meters, tents on a snow platform. Some of the climbers had oxygen bottles, some did not. Kölblinger went without oxygen, as he had on his 3 previous 8,000ers. They tried to sleep for a few hours. At 3:30 in the morning, on July 10th, the rope teams began moving up into the darkness, one after another. On the summit route that day, there were several groups at once. The Austrians from Göschel's team, another international rope team, Pakistani high-altitude support guides hauling ropes and spare oxygen bottles. They all moved along the same line, the one used by most expeditions on the mountain. The air up here is 3 times thinner than at sea level. Every step costs 3 or 4 breaths, and the pace rarely climbs above 100 meters of elevation an hour. By midday, several of the Austrians had grasped a simple fact. The pace was slow, the summit was still far above, and time was running out faster than altitude was being gained. Getting back down in daylight was no longer possible. Part of the team, including Hans Wenzel, turned around and went back to Camp 4. Kölblinger went higher. One of his teammates, before turning around, told him plainly that the hour was late, that he should turn back. The Austrian refused. Briefly, no argument. The group went down to the tents of Camp 4. On the slope, he was left on his own. After some time, he caught up with a rope team moving ahead of him and joined onto it. From then on, they moved together, step for step. He had a radio schedule, 1 call every hour. Until 5 in the evening, he checked in regularly. His voice was calm, no complaints about how he was feeling. After 5, the radio went silent. Camp 4 kept calling every few minutes. No answer. There is nowhere to hide from the wind on that ridge. The rope team reached the summit of Nanga Parbat at about 10 minutes past 6 in the evening. The sun was already sliding towards the horizon, and the shadow of the summit pyramid lay across the entire upper cirque. About an hour left until darkness. For the Austrian, this was the 4th 8,000er of his life. Long bands of cloud were stretching in from the west. The weather was breaking right in front of them. A few minutes for a photograph, a sip of water, a short exchange, and the rope team turned straight back down. No delay. From the Diamir Valley, a wall of storm was climbing towards the summit pyramid. From the top to the tents of Camp 4, it was more than 1,000 meters of vertical drop, on snow and ice. The first dozens of meters of the descent go along a slope of hard névé, and after that, the steepness keeps growing. On a small shelf at the break, Kölblinger stopped. It looked as if he needed to adjust something in his gear. He set his rucksack down next to him. Behind him, he had 12 hours of climbing without oxygen. At that altitude, the cold bites in a particularly sharp way, and strength drains fast. At that moment, a hurricane gust hit the slope. For several minutes, there was no visibility at all, a white wall of snow and air. When the wind dropped for a few seconds, and the climbers ahead turned to look back, Kölblinger was already gone from the slope. Only tracks were left. They led off towards the steep edge of the rib and broke off there. The wind had swallowed everything. Around 9 in the evening, an alert reached base camp. Contact with the Austrian had been lost several hours earlier, and no one had seen him on the descent. At Camp 4, several descending climbers had already gathered, Hans Wenzel among them. The decision was taken at once. 3 Pakistani high-altitude guides from the support group set out upwards into the night. They carried hot drinks in thermos flasks, an oxygen bottle, ropes, medical supplies. They climbed for several hours in complete darkness, at the upper limit of altitude, against the wind, along the same line where the missing man should have been. Every step cost as much as 3 normal ones. They came back empty-handed. No trace, no voice, no piece of gear abandoned along the way up. From base camp, the first satellite messages went out to Austria. Lost on the descent from the summit, the night search produced nothing. Very little hope left. On the morning of July 11th, several expedition members climbed up the same route. At an altitude of 8,064 meters, they found Kölblinger's rucksack. Inside were his ski poles and his ice axe, tidily stowed away. Exactly 100 meters lower, at 8,016, his hat lay in the fern. Between the rucksack and the hat, a broad, broken track was visible in the snow, the mark of a body sliding down the slope. Lower still, they found one of his outer gloves. Below that, the slope turns into the sheer Diamir face, about 3 kilometers of pure vertical drop. From the pattern of those traces, it was obvious. The man had gone down that face. Kölblinger himself was nowhere to be seen. Only those 3 items on a single line. Later, a Pakistani military helicopter flew along the wall several times. Nothing. On July 13, 2009, the APA-OTS news agency published an official confirmation of his death. The source was Heike Goschel, the wife of the expedition leader, who was receiving satellite messages from base camp. Her wording was careful. There was no hope left, and the team feared that he would never be found. The Österreichischer Alpenverein issued a short statement on the death of one of its members. In Traunkirchen, the news arrived in the afternoon. Their deputy mayor was gone. At home, Aloysia, their grown daughter, and a phone that did not stop ringing for several hours. The Austrian newspapers Oberösterreichische Nachrichten and OE24 ran his portrait in their obituaries. In the municipality and in the forestry service, there was mourning. The town is small. Every neighbor, every local official had known him personally. And on that same July 11th, Goschel's team was climbing their new line and putting in the first ascent of the Canadian-Austrian Northwest Buttress. Their countryman, at that same moment, was already dead. Wolfgang Kölblinger was never found. 5 years later, in May 2014, a memorial service was held in Traunkirchen. His former classmates from the Forstschule Weidhofen an der Eibs, the class of 1972 to 1974, raised money for a memorial. On the grounds of the walled campus, beside the Linden Alley, in the forest, they set up a wooden door made of larch. Inside it, a marble plaque, an enamel oval portrait with a gold rim, a Latin cross, and a dedication from his classmates. After the consecration, the plaque was given to Aloysia for safekeeping. It was finally installed in place on August 30th, 2019. Later, in the Salzkammergut, a running route appeared, the Wolfgang Kölblinger Runde. That was his route. From the man who went up for his 4th 8,000er, 3 things remain. A larch door in the forest below Traunkirchen, a running route along the lake, and a rucksack with ski poles somewhere at 8,064 meters on the Diamir face. On the morning of the 3rd of July, 2023, 2 Polish climbers walked back into base camp. They are Piotr Krzyżowski from Żywiec, a member of the KW Bielsko-Biała Club, and Waldemar Kowalewski. The third man from their rope team is not with them. He is Paweł Kopeć, 38 years old, from Kielce. There was no avalanche, no fall on the ridge either, no hurricane, no disappearance without a trace, and no rescue operation was ever launched. The day before, on the 2nd of July, all 3 of them stood on the summit of an 8,000er. A few hours later, one of them stopped breathing inside a tent at the 4th camp, right next to his partner. He simply did not wake up. How a successful ascent ends in death on the way down, that is what follows. Paweł Tomasz Kopeć came from the Świętokrzyski Voivodeship, central Poland. He was a member of the Świętokrzyski Klub Alpinistyczny. He was also a member of the Speleoklub Świętokrzyski, a cave climber, a taternik jaskiniowy. He sat in the cadre reserve of the Polski Związek Alpinizmu, the Polish Mountaineering Association. He trained on the local crags, places like Kadziełnia and Stokówka, on the Kraków-Częstochowa upland, in the Tatras, the Alps, the Caucasus. He traveled across Africa. The only family member mentioned by name is his brother Krzysztof. On Paweł's own Facebook page, there is a short line about the mountains, with no post to it. Why mountains? Honestly, I don't know. The Himalayas appear late in his life and arrive in small doses, 3 expeditions across 5 years. In 2018, Manaslu in Nepal, a first attempt on an 8,000er, no summit. A year later, he tries again. With him are Paweł Michalski and Marek Olczak. On the 28th of September, 2019, summit, without supplemental oxygen, the first 8,000er of his life. In 2021, Lhotse, with the same Michalski, again without oxygen. He reaches the 4th camp at around 8,000 meters, goes no higher, turns back. Nanga Parbat in 2023 is meant to close out his second peak in that altitude category. Not a professional, not a face on a magazine cover. An ordinary man from a small town in Poland for whom the big mountains are a parallel second life running alongside work. Nanga Parbat in the summer of 2023 follows the same logic. The trip has no big PR objective, no sponsorship contract. There is no national program behind it either. Sitting in the cadre reserve does not mean a place on a state winter expedition. The trip comes from inside the club, a private effort. The route is the Kinchover on the western side, the classic summer line. The 3 of them carry no supplemental oxygen. There are no porters above base camp either. Every climber hauls his own gear. Upward, only on your own legs and your own breathing. This is a Polish private expedition, not a classic commercial package. Each climber moves independently, in alpine style. The central rope team is built from people with very different altitude backgrounds. By this point, Krzyżowski already has Gasherbrum 2 from 2021 and a Broad Peak plus K2 link-up in the summer of 2022, done in 9 days. Nanga Parbat is his 4th 8,000er. Paweł Kopeć is going for his second 8,000er. Waldemar Kowalewski is the 3rd member of this rope team, and at the same time, the one who will stay beside Kopeć on the descent. There is a wider Polish group on the mountain as well. Several names, not dozens of people, no roll call needed. They fix no ropes on the route. In late June 2023, the Polish group walks in and sets up the main camp. Then the usual rotation through the higher stations. First camp, second, third, at around 6,800 meters. Cycles like these repeat 3 times, so the body learns to live at altitude. The forecast shows a narrow window of good weather on the 2nd of July. The team picks that date. The decision is made without outside help. No helicopters, no assault camps above the 3rd, no extra people. On the clean shoulders of 3 men. On the night from the 1st to the 2nd of July, around 11:30 at night, according to Krzyżowski's own website, the 3 of them leave the 3rd camp for the summit push. Above the slope, cold and a hard wind that will keep building by sunrise. Visibility in the beginning is fine. The 3 of them move along a line they already know from acclimatization. A chain of headlamps stretches up the snow. Krzyżowski takes a faster pace from the start and pulls ahead. Kopeć and Kowalewski stay closer to each other, slower. No incidents, just a long, high-altitude climb that will take around 15 to 16 hours. An ordinary summit night. Nothing exceptional. Around 2:10 in the afternoon, Krzyżowski is the first to reach the summit. A short time later, in the second half of the day, Kopeć and Kowalewski are on top. According to Explorer's Web, almost simultaneously with Krzyżowski, separated by only a few minutes, on the summit, strong wind and snowfall, visibility drops, there is no time to linger. A few brief radio calls down to base camp and back. Krzyżowski is the first to start the descent. The summit here is not the finale and not the climax, just a waypoint between what has already been done and what is about to begin below. Krzyżowski descends faster than the others. By midnight, from the 2nd to the 3rd of July, he is already in the 3rd camp, near midnight as Explorer's Web puts it. Kopeć and Kowalewski come down together, slower, Somewhere above 7,300 meters, Kopeć starts to have problems. Wspinanie.pl, the Polish climbing portal, would later put it in one line. Exhaustion and dehydration severely weakened Paweł Kopeć. Kowalewski himself would later tell the AFP news agency that his partner was getting weaker and weaker. Zahid Hussein, a local police official, would add through the same agency that Kopeć was having breathing problems while coming down the mountain. No dramatic forks in the road. No, he refused to go any further. The man is simply moving slower than he needs to, and the pace falls with every passing hour. Kowalewski stays with him. He does not push ahead after Krzyżowski. One of the two stays with the weaker man. At this altitude, that decision is what will define how the night ends. The two of them do not reach the third camp. On the way down, they stop at the fourth, above 7,000 meters. An exact figure is not possible to pin down here. The sources differ, and all three numbers refer to the same point on the route. Inside the tent, the two of them, Kopeć and Kowalewski. Outside, wind below -20. Kopecz's breathing turns heavy, without any sharp attack. What exactly Kowalewski did during those hours, whether he gave water, whether he spoke, how he read the moments as they came, there is no open documentary record, and this account honestly leaves that off camera. The main diagnosis recognized internationally through the Pakistani authorities is acute mountain sickness, AMS, on top of dehydration and exhaustion. That version is repeated by AFP, AP, Explorers Web, Pro-Pakistani. According to unconfirmed reports in the Polish press, his heart could not take the load. That is a theory, not a diagnosis. Inside the tent, the difference no longer matters. On the morning of the 3rd of July, 2023, Paweł Kopeć dies. Kowalewski is the only witness. Help cannot come up to such an altitude. No helicopter lands here. No rescue operation, neither on the ground nor in the air. A message goes down by radio to base camp. After that, Karar Hydri of the Alpine Club Pakistan, through AFP, takes the floor. Any decision about bringing the body down will be made after consultation with the family, that is all. From this altitude, Kowalewski descends alone. There was no one left to help. It all ended inside an ordinary summer climb on an 8,000er with no catastrophe. The body of Paweł Kopeć remains in the area of the fourth camp. Evacuation from such an altitude on the Kinchová route lies beyond the limits of realistic help. According to AFP, through Karar Hydri, the family decides what to do with that. As of 2026, the body is still on the mountain. By the same AFP, Kopeć becomes the 86th fatality on this mountain across the entire history of climbing on it. The number is just one number, no epithets. On the 3rd of July, a few hours after the radio message from the mountain, the Świętokrzyski Club Alpinistyczny posts a short statement on Facebook. The club says that all of them are in shock today, that their fellow club member, Paweł Kopeć, had reached the summit of Nanga Parbat the day before, that it had been his second 8,000er, and that for this achievement he paid the highest price. The Polish media run the news the same day. Wspinanie.pl, RMF24, TVN24, Eurosport, Radio Kielce, Echo DNA Świętokrzyskie, TV Świętokrzyska. His brother Krzysztof would later come to the memorial gathering and bring private childhood photographs. At such altitudes, it is not only catastrophe that can prove deadly. Sometimes one ordinary night in a tent after a successful summit is enough, and somewhere nearby, on these same slopes, others remain too.